what's happened in Canada that's allowed SoTL to grow, takes me back to a paper that I co-authored with Lynn Taylor and John Thompson in the International Journal of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And we looked at 3 different levels, as I often do, as you know, more local levels, more institutional levels, and then more nationals. And we were looking then at what would have to happen in order for SoTL to really get traction. Lynn wrote about what had to happen nationally. She was very involved in that. So it was very near and dear to her heart as she was trying to create circumstances that would allow for a blossoming of SoTL across the country. Lynn, like many of us, is a believer in networks. I am, very much so. So Lynn and you and others became network builders, whether you called yourselves that or not, I'm not sure, although I think you did at times, between institutions. So that here at UBC, we could learn that something was actually going on at Mount Royal or at Brock or wherever. And those of us who were charged with the responsibility of doing the local political work had a little bit more, I don't like to use violent images, but more ammunition when we went to speak with senior administrators. So there were people across this country who were creating a tapestry, kind of a fabric nationally that had SoTL as a really important piece. It was like going way back, 25, 30 years or more, when people were trying to create the ethos that teaching and learning actually mattered, and they could cite examples of other places in the country where it did. Now, the message was somewhat more refined and nuanced. It matters enough. We're going to do research on it, and people are doing it. Following closely on the heels of that was the establishment of a couple of institutes across the country. UBC had one, Mount Royal had one, other places, either formally or informally, started to provide the kind of support for this research that faculty members are used to in all kinds of research. And that showed a valuing of it, and it provided opportunity where opportunity didn't exist before. And then we started to come together, as we do nationally, to compare notes. And so I think that when you ask what happened in the history, you begin in this case by looking at the big picture. You're looking at national network building. Then you look at what that did, certainly in my circumstances at UBC, in terms of facilitating our goal of creating something really quite significant, like an institute with a few bucks thrown in its direction. We never had a lot of money. We didn't need a lot of money, but it said something. And then you could start to work individually with people when you gave them small grants. And the conversations they had around the table were unlike any we'd had before. When engineers wondered why small groups, some of them, the small group students worked very well. And in other cases, you've heard me use this word before, as an engineer said, they imploded. Right? And they'd never thought about it in systematic ways before. And they'd never sat down with people from our Faculty of Education who were experts in small group learning to even design hypotheses about this. And in our history, it's that, I've never really thought about it before, Nicola, but that's the direction I think it went. I think it went from the big to the small, which isn't often the case. Usually it's the other way around. But there were a few of us who just stirred up a little national trouble in a good way, if you know what I mean.